Today I'm speaking to David Rowe, who is a professor of political science at Kenyon. Hi, Professor Rowe.
Morning.
So I have several questions I would like to ask you, and the first one is, what is your view on the latest developments in Ukraine?
Well, my view on the latest developments in Ukraine is that they're concerning. I'm very concerned about Russia's ability in two ways. One is I'm concerned about the gains that Russia is making on the ground and in the war, and in the way in which it's clear that Ukraine at the current moment does not have how do I want to put it, as many resources for defense as I think that Ukraine needs. And I'm also concerned, speaking from the United States, about just the delay that the United States had in providing aid to Ukraine. The United States is not the only state that funds Ukraine, but I think it is the most important, in part because it is, in a sense, a leader in NATO, a leader of the Western world. And Ukraine is trying to join the Western world, and that's partly, or actually primarily, what the war is about. And it was just really concerning that it took the United States so long to pass an aid bill that I think had overwhelming support inside the Congress, but nonetheless there is just a large enough group of people in opposition that they were able to delay it for months, which I think has really affected Ukraine on the battlefield, and has also raised doubts about the longevity of the American commitment. And so those are the things that I'm really, really concerned about.
So do you think, in light, you mentioned something about the developments in the battlefield, it seems like Ukraine is losing initiative? I mean, it's lost already, so Russia is pushing more and more. They have an advantage, like military advantage, manpower, and it seems like things are not going well for Ukraine. You have a feeling that there is a way still to overcome this challenge and like to prevent Russia from moving forward, or you think like overall, like politically, militarily speaking, Ukraine is in big trouble?
I don't think Ukraine is in big trouble yet. I think part of it is that Ukraine, did run out. My understanding is Ukraine did run out of munitions, and especially I think air superiority or air defense is one of the key things. And that's critical to modern warfare, and that really, I think, hurt Ukraine quite a bit. There is also the manpower issue, but that's a problem for Ukraine itself to resolve. I don't want to say how Ukraine should solve that, but Ukraine is facing a much larger adversary, and I think as long as the flow of aid from the West to Ukraine continues, that I think Ukraine can certainly hold its own and maybe even prevail on the battlefield. But it requires support from the West, and that support has to be consistent, it has to be clear, and it has to be adequate. And I think with the hiccups in the United States, that was, in a sense, called into question. And as long as that's in question, you have no incentive then for Russia to do anything but sort of pursue to try and escalate the or escalate's the wrong word, but to try and continue the battle.
But do you think there is a risk of this support running out? It seems like the United States, I think, in a way hinted that support is not going to be forever, and in case if, let's say, Trump comes to power, the burden of this financial aid will be on Europe more, and Europe is far behind Russia. Yeah.
Well, I think that's certainly a possibility. I think that there still is widespread support inside the American public for Ukraine. It's just how the American political system works that sometimes it's hard for that widespread public support to make its effect heard in policy, and in part because you have Donald Trump, who is historically has some antipathy toward Ukraine. there is now a large contingent inside of the Republican Party. It's not yet a majority in Congress, but it can block things in Congress, which is what we've seen. There is a substantial group of people in Congress inside the Republican Party who are deeply skeptical about Ukraine and argue that we should cut off funding. I think it's the wrong way to go. I think that it hurts American interests, but that is there. And I think in part, what happens we have a presidential election coming up, and what happens in 2024, in November of 2024, will be critical. Because I do not think that if a Trump administration comes back into power in 2025, that they will continue the support for Ukraine that the United States is currently giving.
But it seems Russia is using this opportunity when it seems like this aid has not arrived yet. They are throwing everything at once, and they try to overcome all those defense lines that seem to be very weak. They haven't really put them in place. So it seems that Russia will do everything, to dethrone, Ukrainian government. Yeah, and particularly this year, it seems like they're quite active, right?
I think that's absolutely right. And one of the misconceptions that we have over here in the United States is that there are a lot of people who argue that the war is just essentially about sort of the Russian-speaking regions of Ukraine, which is, I think, just absolutely wrong. And I think you're absolutely right, which is that what the Putin regime is trying to do is to undermine any chance of Ukrainian democracy. And so it's really not about particular territories. It's about Ukrainian's government. It's about the Ukrainian people. It's about their right of self-determination. It's about their right to have a democracy. It's about their right to join the West. And I think that Russia is very, adeptly using this hiccup, in the delivery of Western aid to Ukraine to try and change the facts on the ground in a way that are really to its advantage. And I think it's left us playing a little bit of catch up, which is, again, I think very concerning. I don't think that it's nothing that can't be overcome, but it's something that, at least in my view, never should have happened, because the flow of aid should have been continual.
But also there's this misconception that, it's time for negotiations. But first of all, Russia is not willing to negotiate anymore because they haven't. They seize now initiative, right? So, and they are not in the end of the day, they're not interested in Ukrainian state, and they don't want Ukraine to be this independent pro-Western country. Yeah. So they just really want to demolish Ukrainian democracy and take over the whole country, most likely. Yeah. So there is no point of negotiations, and the West is weak. They're not acting. Yeah.
You're putting a finger on something that is one of my key frustrations when I talk to people about this, because often you'll hear, well, we should find a negotiated solution, but you say, okay, well, what would that solution look like? And there is this sort of naive belief that a negotiated or a diplomatic solution only requires one party. It requires two parties. Both of them have to be willing to negotiate. And as long as Russia can see itself prevailing in a longer term conflict, because maybe in November of 2024 there's a much more sort of pro-Russian administration in the United States, it is not going to negotiate. Or if it does negotiate, its demands will be ones that I don't think that Ukraine will accede to, precisely because I think what Russia is after is to pull Ukraine back into the fold of a larger sort of Moscow-centered, if you could call it, European empire. And it does not want democracy in Ukraine. It does not want Ukraine to join the West. And so the conditions that Russia would put on a negotiated settlement would have to preclude those things that Ukraine so desperately desires. And so I don't think that a negotiated solution is at all sort of practicable, in part because I don't see any Russian interest in any kind of negotiated solution that would be one that would be acceptable to Ukraine.
Right, I fully agree with you, and I just don't understand why some people are pushing and saying that's the only way. It seems like we need to look at other possible scenarios, right, and how to end this war. And do you think one of them would be to start deploying some non-combat even troops, like, and slowly integrating Ukraine in NATO, or at least part of Ukraine? I don't know how it would look like, but it seems like there is no other way to stop this, Russian offensive and
Well, I know
destruction. Yeah.
this is an idea that you hear, currently being discussed and more openly. I know that from the United States side, the United States is trying to walk a knife edge here because on the one hand it wants to support Ukraine, but on the other hand it doesn't want the war to escalate, and so it's really sensitive to anything that looks like it might be an escalatory step. And putting sort of NATO forces or forces from NATO countries, I think is a better way of putting it, inside Ukraine, I think is at this point, just probably a bridge too far for the Biden administration. But I think it is something that's definitely on the table, and I think it, depending on how facts change on the ground, that it might at some point be something that gets seriously considered. I don't think at this point, because of the Biden administration's fears of a broadening war and escalation of the war, that they're going to buy onto that. But that doesn't mean that at some point in the future that they won't, right? I mean, it just, really depends on how things develop over the next couple of months.
I see, I see. Because it seems like Russia is already, they already consider that they're at war with the West. They openly stated, they even had this exhibition of those acquired military equipment, yeah, at the Red Square. So and I've seen them, they all write that, oh, we're at war with NATO, NATO's on the ground, we know it, instructors. I mean, it's already, the line has been crossed, yeah, and at stake we have like the whole European security, and it seems like it's time for more affirmative action, yeah, not just being afraid, because Russia has been doing atrocious things, and it's time maybe to step up this game, right?
Yeah, or just at least make sure that Russia's ability to make gains on the battlefield in Ukraine are stopped. The one problem that you have, though, is that the minute that forces from NATO countries engage in the battle in Ukraine, and this is Putin can argue he's at war with the United States, but one of the things that because there's been no direct combat, it doesn't actually give him, sort of permission, if you will, to attack American forces anywhere. But the minute that you insert, actual, sort of combat, especially into the battlefield, then suddenly, everywhere that there are NATO forces can become a potential Russian target. I mean, they're already, but it would be it would be a clear escalatory step for Russia to go after the Baltics. But as long as the battlefield is limited to Ukraine, right? There's um, a disincentive for Russia to do that. And so I think, again, from the for the Biden administration, it's really how is it that we can can contain the war. And this is on the one hand, in the broader strategic view, you say, oh yeah, I understand that, but in sort of the Ukrainian view, it's like this is just really hard, and I don't see any really good way out of it. And I think that making sure that Ukraine has the ability to defend itself, making sure that the West is behind Ukraine, not just rhetorically, but in terms of delivering the amounts of weapons and munitions that it needs, and making sure that there's some long-term basis, getting past the November 2024 election with a pro-European, pro-Ukraine administration in place. I think those are sort of far more effective, because if that happens, I think then Russia's calculus changes, because I think, it's, increasingly becoming apparent that the United States is engaged in this long-term struggle. And we've got to actually, in a sense, act like we're in a long-term struggle.
But it seems this war of attrition is more beneficial for them. They have such a superiority in terms of everything, so that will just drain Ukrainian energy and power and demoralize even more, people.
Yeah,
So
and I really worry about that. I mean, I think that's one of the the real dilemmas that we face is a war that drags on is also, and in part you can see this is could be part of sort of a Russian fallback strategy. The more that the war drags on, the harder it is going to be for Ukraine to realize its goals of becoming a full-fledged member of the West, of joining the European Union, of joining NATO and getting a security guarantee that is, in some sense, more ironclad. And so, an endless war of attrition actually meets some of Russia's goals.
another probably important aspect is this informational warfare they conduct, because they're very successful at pushing this message for Ukraine already lost, like there's not much to do, and they actually are very effective among Ukrainian population, because more people they just don't want to fight, and in a way you can understand it, but they use this distorted truth, to push their narratives, and they're winning, it seems, in this dimension.
Yeah, it really does, and one of the weird ways that you see it reverberate, because different messages go to different audiences inside the United States. You also hear the argument that Russia has already lost, and therefore it's time to have a settlement because Russia has lost. It clearly has not prevailed, and therefore, and it's just like, no, you have to. It's because what people will do is they will point to the cost that Russia has paid for the war and say, look at how costly this was. They've lost. We should just leave. And the point is what determines whether you've won or lost is not the cost that you've paid. It's determined the cost relative to your war aims. And Russia's war aims are still viable. So it has not actually, I think, lost the conflict, despite what you hear inside of some circles in American politics, that and this puts us in a very and I think dangerous place, because this disinformation is so effective, and people do want peace, and so it seems as a sort of a pathway to get there, and I don't think that in the end it really is.
Yeah, and it seems it's really hard to find those arguments, and so I just sometimes don't understand, because like Russia has stepped up its military production, Europe is behind, the US is not providing sufficient support, and they're saying that Ukraine is doing okay, it's not very critical, but it's really a catastrophe in the battlefield now. And I've seen the statistics, thousands, they just give up often, just go to the Russian side, or there's such a disorganization in the battlefield, lack of manpower, and older people fight, like 40 plus. So it's just incredible, and this mobilization is so costly, and they want to mobilize like half a million.
Yeah.
But it's really problematic, and what will you do if you don't have equipment, all those things, to stop Russians, so many things at once. All right, plus Zelensky 5 years passed, right? So another challenge, right? Legitimacy of his presidency. It's another one.
Yeah.
Do you have opinion on that? Like that 5 years passed and we have a president and they don't want to have new elections? No, it also can have impact, right?
Yeah, I mean that also can have an impact. I think that that it is important to sort of keep in the forefront and what are in a sense Ukraine's war aims, which I think are more than just not to be to be become a vassal state of Russia, but actually to join the West and to create the circumstances under which that can happen. Um, and I think that has to be that also has to be part of part of the how I put it the factors that Ukrainian politics has to take into account, because you could still win the war or still win the battle with Russia, but also lose Ukrainian democracy, and that I think is something that is that needs to be taken seriously.
So do you think there's any possibility for Ukraine to secure more support? It seems like this support from US, and there was, I think that they even hinted that it might be less. I don't know, such a huge amount of funding allocated, you're right, but then there might be a risk. So how can Ukraine ensure there is no risk? It seems like Europe doesn't have capacity to fill the gap for US, right?
Well, I think in the United States, one of the things that has to happen inside of the American political system is to realize that that the sort of the strategic challenges that the United States faces are interlinked, and because you have a lot of concern across both sides of the aisle about China. China is this growing hegemon. Russia is just a weak power, and it's only limited to Europe. It's not it doesn't provide the same kind of global challenge that a rising China might. But I think that there's not yet the realization inside American politics that those two things are tightly interlinked. That what happens in Ukraine will affect what happens, in the sort of managing the U.S.-China relationship, um, and if the war in Ukraine goes poorly, that actually is going to put the United States in a much weaker position, and in its other sort of strategic challenges that it faces. And I think that is not yet sort of filtered down to sort of a broad realization inside of the American political system, that there is some sense, this idea that what happens in Ukraine is in some way separable from what happens with American power in other parts of sort of the international system, but they're actually very tightly, I think, interlinked, because people are looking, and if they see the United States, saying, hey, if you just outlast the United States in Ukraine, what that sends a message to China and to anybody else who doesn't like the way in which the United States is helping to, organize a peaceful, liberal world. They'll say, hey, you just have to outlast the United States. They're not really committed to this world that they say is, sort of fundamental, and that is a very dangerous message to send.
This is crucial for United States also to have this more serious approach, right, to this, not just act like that. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't have any other questions. Maybe you have something else, like the last message to add.
Well, I think we live in a very challenging time, and I think that it's that especially in democracies, it often takes a while for people to get serious about things, because in the West and the United States, we've lived for such a long time where the wars that we faced were always in some sense further away from our interest than this one is here. And so I think it's taking some time to sort of for it to percolate down and to realize, how dangerous the world has become, and and wars in places like Ukraine are not going to stay there if we don't act in ways that help that help us and help Ukraine resolve them. And so it's a tense time. It doesn't feel like that, because for most people, life goes on as normal. And so it's just going to take some time, I think, for that realization to percolate down into the sort of a more clear understanding inside of American politics. And I hope that it does, and I hope that it does fairly soon.
Thank you so much for your time today.
No, you're quite welcome. And if you have any other questions or things that pop into your mind that you want to talk about, just let me know. I'd be happy to talk further.
Thank you so much.